Hello everyone, welcome to 6 African Trade Talks, the show that brings you closer to the intra-Africa trade business world. I'm your host, Chad Chawanda. I would like to ask you to please leave a review. It will help us engage more with you and also to improve our podcast. If you haven't subscribed yet, please remember to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to podcasts from. In this episode, our guest is a CFA charter holder with a strong passion for growth of African markets. She is currently the Business Development Manager for Africa in the Primary Markets team at London Stock Exchange. Ope Sule, welcome to 6 African Trade Talks. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Chad.
Very well. Before we start our show, we'd like to hear a word from our sponsors.
Advocado Africa is a pan-African digital marketing social enterprise. With the exponential growth in smartphone users in Africa, you have to take your marketing digital. Advocado can do that for you. Advocado, minding your business.
Africa is talking business. Be a part of it. IATF is the key event boosting trade in Africa. No other event brings together more professionals under one roof. In 2021, IATF's theme will focus on the newly launched African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, a single market for goods and services across 55 countries aimed at boosting trade and investment. To learn more, visit the www.intraafricantradefair.com.
So Ope, you're currently the Business Development Manager for Africa at London Stock Exchange. Please tell us more about what this role entails and how your career has unfolded until you got there.
Sure, Chad. So my role at London Stock Exchange involves engaging with African companies or international companies with significant operations across Africa, as well as their major shareholders, which could be individual shareholders or private equity and venture capital firms, to discuss their equity capital raise plans and how London can support this. Some of the companies that we've worked with recently are Airtel Africa, Helios Towers, and Vivo Energy. And the type of conversations we have with companies include the right time to list, structures to put in place now to prepare for a listing, and the right exchange to list on to get the right investors. We also advise on structures drawn from our experience on other transactions that we've seen in the international markets. Before joining London Stock Exchange, I spent a major part of my career in investment banking. In the early years, I was a generalist, so did a bit of mergers and acquisitions, equity and debt capital markets. I later specialized in debt capital markets, starting in Lagos, where I advised West African companies, sovereign and supranational entities in accessing the domestic and international capital markets. I later moved on to cover the full suite of sub-Saharan African clients across the same segments from London.
Interesting. London has always been a good capital market for African entrepreneurs. What inspired your personal passion and interest in African markets?
So first of all, I'm Nigerian, born and raised. So I have very strong ties. And I also have my family back in Nigeria. Many of them have businesses. And growing up, I saw the constraints that many of them faced in scaling up their businesses, especially in terms of obtaining funding from banks. While I was in school, I entered at one of the Nigerian banks in the credit risk team, and I saw how difficult the process was. I was very curious to see what the possible solution could be, and I didn't have any answers at the time. Now, fast forward to years later, I was introduced to the capital markets, and I saw how effective it is in providing alternative sources of funds to companies by giving them access to a wider range of investors, from pension funds to wealth managers and even retail investors. So I strongly believe the capital markets will play a key role in helping companies scale up their businesses, which in turn provides jobs, improves standard of living of families, and will also help the companies compete on a global scale, which I think is very important to the development of the economies across Africa as a whole. And currently, this passion is ignited in my current role at London Stock Exchange because of the approach we take to the African continent. Aside from enabling access to international investors and vice versa, we also partner with key stakeholders and policymakers across Africa. We have market infrastructure and technology deployed in 9 African markets, and we also continue to work with domestic exchanges on innovative structures in connecting the domestic and international markets. For example, we have cross-border listing mechanisms with the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and the Nigerian Stock Exchange. And I won't go into the technical details, but what it does is that companies can have their securities traded in both markets. So there are companies that have explored this route. Like we have Seplat, who listed in 2014 in London and Nigeria. We have Vivo Energy, who listed in 2018 in Johannesburg and London. And more recently, we have Airtel Africa, who listed in 2019 in London and Nigeria as well.
Interesting. You're talking about different regions in Africa, which leads us to culture. Sub-Saharan Africa is a culturally rich and diverse region. Are there any cultural nuances you have noticed whilst conducting business across the various regions of the continent?
Yes. So in my various roles, I have engaged with people from various countries across Africa. And you're right, we have a very diverse culture, even within the individual countries. And I find that the approach to work is different across the continent. You find that some countries are very fast-paced, while others have a different approach. Also, the political and legal system is quite different. Some countries are more decentralized, where the individual companies have a lot of power in terms of the decisions they're able to make. And in some others, they're heavily regulated by the government. So a lot of the decisions are guided by the government.
Interesting. Talking about culture and governments, Africa is diverse, 55 countries. So you definitely play a key role in opening up African markets or helping African markets get access to the London capital market. The relationship between London Stock Exchange and Africa dates back over 9 decades, with the first African company having listed shares in London in the 1930s. To date, there are about 123 African or African-focused corporates currently listed on or trading in London, more than any other international stock exchange. What draws African companies to London Stock Exchange?
In terms of what draws African companies to London Stock Exchange, I would say one of the main things is because of the international nature of the exchange. So we're the most international exchange in terms of the diverse issuer base we have on our platform. 38% of the companies listed in London are international. We've also had a long relationship with the African continent spanning decades. Like you mentioned, the first African company listed in the 1930s, and now we have 123 African companies listed in London, which makes us the international exchange with the largest number of African companies. And we come second only to Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which is in itself an African exchange. Now, due to the nature of London's capital market, investors have built years of experience working on diverse transactions across continents, especially from Africa. And they have a good understanding of the African continent. They don't see Africa as a country, but they understand that each country within the continent has its own growth story. Aside from this, we also have a partnership approach, which I spoke about earlier. We provide trading software and clearing technology to African markets. And we've also had partnership agreements with some African countries and have built meaningful relationships with stakeholders in many countries across the continent. For example, in 2016, we established an Africa Advisory Group, which brings together stakeholders across Africa to discuss challenges and opportunities presented by the development of the continent's capital markets. And so far, we've published 5 reports of recommendations.
Before we continue, we'd like to hear a word from our sponsors.
Did you see that billboard? No, I didn't. I was looking at my phone. That's how billboard advertising is now ineffective. If you ever wondered how to employ people with disabilities, then by working with Advocado, you would have just done that. Advocado is a social enterprise focusing on using digital marketing to create employment for people of determination and young women across Africa. Let's do it together. If you want to make a difference, contact us now at www.advocado.africa.
So, Ope, what is the process broadly for an African private company to list in London?
Interesting question. Let me first start by talking about the markets that issuers could list on. So we have different markets for different companies in their growth stages. And I'll start with AIM, which is high growth markets. So AIM is set up and structured for high growth companies. And then we also have the main markets where companies could either list on the standard segment or the premium market. And in this, or the main markets, you find larger and more mature companies. Now, the listing process takes on average 6 to 9 months. And the actual timeline depends on many factors, including how prepared and committed the company is to the IPO process. Now, before listing, there are certain things a company would need to put in place, such as defining its business plan and strategy, governance structure, internal controls, its financial accounting disclosure. And the IPO process itself involves preparation of offer documents and regulatory approvals, depending on which of the markets I mentioned earlier that you're looking to list on. That is, if you're looking to list on AIM or the main markets. The IPO process also involves a series of investor engagements. We always encourage companies to have early meetings with investors to get a sense of what they should be looking at when they're doing an IPO. So a company looking to start the IPO process will need to appoint advisors who would walk them through all these processes, which is the legal, the regulatory, and the investor engagement process.
That's quite interesting. I'm sure some of our listeners are actually taking notes right now, because with the Africa Continental Free Trade coming into effect, a lot of industries are going to be growing and will be looking for capital in London. What is the nature of the support, if any, that London Stock Exchange can offer to African companies, particularly towards accessing capital and networking?
We continue to work on initiatives to support both our current and potential issuers. An example is we launched the Companies to Inspire Africa report in 2017. And the report gives visibility to opportunities across Africa and showcases high-grade companies across the continent. The second report was published in 2019, which featured 360 companies across 32 countries in Africa. And interestingly, last year, we partnered with PwC on a one-year-on report celebrating the achievements of companies that were featured in the 2019 report that had gone on to raise debt or equity capital, acquire a company to expand their business, or be acquired. And we're very proud of the results that we saw. We also have events, a lot of which are now virtual, which focuses on pertinent topics across different sectors. So in the past, when these events were physical, there were very good networking opportunities as well. Last year, we launched a streaming service, which we call our Spark Live platform. And it was launched right in time, for the lockdown, and especially given the social distancing measures that we've had. And it has been a very key tool for exchange of content and communications, and also provides our issuers access to millions of investors.
Speaking of events, my first interaction with the London Stock Exchange was at the Mining Indaba in Cape Town. That's what got me interested. Yeah. So definitely, I'm one who has experienced the value of the events that you've been holding. What advice would you give to an African company contemplating listing in London?
I would say an equity listing is a very important decision and requires commitments from the founders, the major shareholders, and the executive management team as well. And early preparation is very key. From London Stock Exchange, we're always very keen to engage companies early on in the process to act as a sounding board and to also provide guidance based on our experience.
What do you expect will be the impact of the commencement of trading under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement on trading activity on London Stock Exchange?
As you said, Chad, the AFCFTA has the potential to expand various industries and even open up more industries across the continent, especially with increased trade links. And these companies will need access to capital to support their growth. And I expect that they will be looking to both the domestic and international markets. Now, London Stock Exchange is and will be well positioned to support companies that look to the international markets for funding at the time.
My business is growing. Thanks to Advocado Africa, digital marketing is the way to go. I get to know what my customers want and how they feel in real time. Besides, I choose how much to spend. I feel in control. If you want to take control of your marketing, contact Advocado Africa now. Visit www.advocadoafrica. Advocado Africa. We mind your business.
Africa is a continent full of potential, but potential means nothing if we don't take action to create value. Let us take action. Thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to post and share this episode on your social media platforms. It will help us reach our mission of sharing knowledge about intra-Africa trade and making it available to as many people as possible. Let us grow our continent. We can go far, fast, together. If you can please leave a review on our podcast page or on Apple Podcasts. See you next time.